It's extra special in the fact that it looks like a craftsman style bungalow, but on the inside it's Portland's first permitted straw-bale structure. Kind of the goal and the joke that I use is that it's supposed to be like the gateway drug for natural building, just so that it looks normal, it's easy on the eyes. For most people who have this association with natural building as being like, whoa, like hippied out, or has this one really particular aesthetic with it that might turn a lot of people off. Just to have something that they can approach in a way that feels just normal, like it just fits in, and then the surprise is on the inside.
This is Peak Moment. We are living at a peak of human innovation, information, wealth, and health. But we're also at a peak of population and consumption, with rising temperatures and declining resources fueled by cheap oil and gas. Peak Moment Television, bringing you examples of positive responses to energy decline and climate change through local community action.
Hi, welcome to Peak Moment. I'm Janaea Donaldson. I'm in urban Portland with two lovely older houses and a garden in between just off the main drag, and I'm with the owner of this property, Lydia Doleman, who, thank you for joining me, who is a natural builder, and your company, I love the name, Flying Hammer.
Correct.
Great.
Yep.
You've had an interesting story about this property and the adjoining property, so tell us what you've got here.
So we have two adjoining properties, and we're dividing it into a third, and it started about 7 years ago when a friend of mine, who's also another natural builder, and I decided that we were kind of done renting and really wanted to own our own place together. And for various reasons, we were fed up with renting, and at that point, anybody who had a pulse could get a loan. So we got in really cheaply and purchased this house here and began our process of co-owning. And at that point, both of us wanted to create a demonstration model of some of the technologies that we use in natural building. And we also wanted to create a house that showcased that. And in the meantime, while she and I and two other folks were living together, we began starting to have the conversation of what would co-housing look like for us.
Co-housing.
So the notion of people being able, because we felt totally fortunate in order to get in and own a house, and ownership allows you to do what you want with a space as opposed to being tied down to certain rules and regulations as to how to live in a place. And part of the...
When you're a renter.
When you're a renter. So if we wanted to have a composting toilet, we couldn't do that if our landlord didn't agree, or if we wanted to do gray water, all of these things that we felt we wanted to live by our principles. And so in order to do that, we needed to have our own place in order to do that.
Okay.
And then we wanted to create a place for other people who could be able to do this as well and create a demonstration model just in order to help start or go along with the whole movement of cities being a bit less impactful on the planet.
So you're talking about some ecological principles. Give us a handle on what you want to live by.
One of them was just having less biomass leaving the site. So we're flushing our waste down the toilet and into the river to be processed, and it just becomes this energy intensive process. And then we're spending our money from earning, that we earn by buying bags of dirt to bring them back on the site. So just from composting our own food, and then we wanted to step it up to composting our own human manure and just kind of keep the cycles in a really small space.
Okay.
And so we began to look at sustainability through the lens of sustainability is shortening your dependencies. So if we were able to basically grow as much of our own food, we eat however many eggs a day, why are we buying it from the store when we could raise chickens? And then create that whole cycle of being able to raise our own food and grow our own soil and grow our own food and have that cycle just kind of stay in one place. Whereas
and the water that falls here in Portland stay here.
Yeah, we can capture it, use it as much as possible, and then do things like our composting toilet really reduces the amount of water that we use, being really conscientious about how we use water in the space, whether it's watering our fruits and vegetables or how we wash our clothes or whether we're using the dryer or not, and just trying to really minimize our impact, and also in that begin to realize our relationships that we have with things like energy, food, waste, and so that it becomes apparent and part of our lifestyle.
So continue with your experiment. I just want thanks for this.
Okay. So that we started building this little cottage in the backyard as a demonstration model, and then we also started remodeling the house in order to embody those principles. So all of the finishes on the interior, either no VOC paints,
which are what does
volatile
that mean?
Organic compounds.
Okay.
Which it basically means something that will off gas, and you can have volatile organic compounds. It just means volatile, that it's kind of explosive in nature.
Right.
It's gassy, and some of those are really hazardous to your health. And by limiting your intake of that, given that we live in this urban environment that has a lot of chemicals in it, that hopefully we're creating a healthier lifestyle for ourselves.
Sure.
And if you were to even expand the lens that you're looking at it, is that from a manufacturing standpoint, if you're buying paints that don't have that, there's a person working in the factory who isn't exposed to it, there isn't a person mining it, just all along the way, it becomes something that has a bit more of a
Okay, I
healthy
just wanted
impact.
folks to know what that was.
Yeah.
So, the paints in here as you remodeled, and what else did you do?
So we have all clay-based or lime-based, and so that they're all earthen
Surfaces?
surfaces. And then we refinish the floors, and we try to do use only recycled materials. So we can, being in the city, there's like so much stuff that you can pull from to build with, whereas there's just a huge waste stream to pull from, which is great in some ways, and hopefully it gets to a point where the loops are smaller as opposed to so big. And then also just trying to make the space work really well for having a group of people living in a house. Because generally, as Americans, we have this notion of like, this is mine, this is my space.
Yeah.
And so we created systems where we're sharing all of our food. And so even though none of us are in a romantic relationship or the relationships where we're used to sharing things, where we're all in platonic situations, we're able to share meals and food, bills, chores, just kind of practicing a little bit more of a shared lifestyle so that we can, there's a little bit of work on some ends, but then on another end, we're cutting our costs in a lot of ways.
I would imagine. Considerably less cost if you're sharing.
Yeah.
You know, there's not the waste and yeah.
So on a really good month for 4 people, sometimes we'll all only be spending $100 to $125 per person per month on groceries.
Okay.
So, I mean, you can spend way more than that.
Sure,
but
sure. So, continue the story. You've got this house, but it's not the only thing that's happening here.
No. So also in concert with all sorts of things that are also happening in Portland, which makes the reason why so many of us choose to live here, is just that there's a lot of great examples of sustainable living in the context of a city, which sometimes seems so overwhelmingly unsustainable. So trying to create a way of sharing space and time and all of that so that we're also stepping a little bit more outside of the economic paradigm that kind of keeps us in an unsustainable living patterns. So whether we're using credit unions or going to the food co-op or just trying to make sure that our daily economic patterns are helping fund organizations and entities and systems that also embody our principles. But we also realized that Sakita and I at that point were sharing a room in order to support ourselves here. So we decided to build the little cottage that's in the backyard as a demonstration. And so that is made out of all reclaimed lumber, and it's straw clay walls with earthen floor, and we were able to create sort of a demonstration model both of ecological sustainability, just with all the materials that we use, but also of small scale living. So it's just a really tiny studio.
How big a space is it?
10 by 12.
That's a small space.
That's small.
One story?
One story with a little loft, and there's a little wood stove in there, and it's kind of like a little cabin. more or less.
Yeah. So it's a sleeping, being in their space.
Yeah.
Not trying to cook kitchen or.
We've thought about expanding that way, and there's definitely plans for that in the future. And then that way it could be its own unit, so
Yes.
that you can have your own private space.
So you've got a tiny house.
A very tiny house, yeah.
And how has that worked out? Is anybody living there, or just a part of, have you? Tell us about it.
It's I've lived there pretty much consistently until about last February, where then I've been in Southern Oregon. So we've just rented it out, and it's a really sweet. It's like a little retreat space. For me, it's been a refuge. Just living in the city is a challenge psychologically on a lot of levels, and in the context of living with a lot of people, to have your own personal space, and then it's such a reflection of a lot of the things that I really care deeply about. So, and it's just, I don't know, it's really sweet because we have an eco roof and earthen plasters and a little tiny wood stove. So I just burn scrap for my jobs, and I have that relationship with heat and cooling that you kind of do in when in a more rural living situation.
Yeah.
So we can definitely take a look at it.
We'll do that.
Yeah. Should we do that now?
No. Tell me, what else?
Okay.
What else has happened here?
Okay. So since then, when we first got the place, there was basically a small lawn in the front yard, and it was all gravel in the backyard. So our first principle was, okay, so there's been kind of a negative human impact here. There's shelter, which is great, but we need to look at sort of long-term, how can we be living in an urban area, creating shelter and creating all of our systems, and make it regenerative. So what we really wanted to do was to create a space that was able to build upon itself, be replicable so that anybody else who moved into a space like this would be like, oh, this is kind of a disaster, could also see the potentiality in that place.
Okay.
So we just started, okay, we need to get a way so that we can build up the biomass in the space and start building soil. And we wanted the little house that we built in the back, it has an eco roof. So instead of displacing all of that soil and earth that was there, or it should have been there, since it was all gravel, we were able to recreate it on the top, so that,
Okay.
I mean, that's the one thing with a lot of housing, is you get this nice shelter, but then the top is just kind of this dead
Right,
space.
right.
And no matter how natural a lot of your wall systems are, it's really difficult to find something that'll protect you from the elements that still embodies the principles of natural building. So
That's one of the nicest things I see a lot here in the Pacific Northwest. You've got the right climate, or you do it right, or somehow. What'd you do with all the gravel?
it's just under there. So slowly we've been trying to plant things that are like root crops that'll help break it up. Anytime we get a chance, I mean, it's a real pain to dig up because it's so compacted. It must have been a parking lot for quite a while.
Yeah, I wondered.
So just digging out for our fire pit there was a 2-hour tour. Just so it's pretty bad, but we've been building up and hoping that over time it'll help break it up.
So you're just building above it, basically. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
So we're building up, hoping to break it up because we don't really want to be exporting things because we want to also embody the fact that there's no away. You know, we all have to like look at things in terms of, you know, we want to manage all of our wastes on site. We want to look at all of our materials and sort of do a materials assessment so that we know what we do have here. And gravel's a great thing for certain things.
Sure. I mean, you want that for drain rock, but yeah. Well, America believes there's a lot of aways, and if I close my eyes and it goes away, it's gone. It truly is gone, and it's not true.
No,
there is somewhere else over there. Tell us about how. Okay,
phase 2. Yes. So at that point, there were 3 of us that had been living there. Probably this is about 2006, so it's about 4 years ago, and Sukita's mother passed away, which is really tragic, and she decided that she needed to leave the community and just go retrace her roots and have this experience. And when she got back, she realized that she didn't really want to live in the context of community anymore. It's just too chaotic. It wasn't for her. And while she was away, the house next door came up for sale. And we had talked about co-housing, and I was just like, wow, well, it would be just such a great opportunity to have the relationship with our neighbors, and petitioned a few people to see if anybody was interested in buying it, and then just realized, like, well, if nobody's going to buy it, I don't want to just let it go and have somebody buy it who might do things that are counterproductive to what we're trying to do here. Yeah. So got a personal loan from a friend, wrote the owner, sent them a letter saying I'm really interested in buying it, and went into negotiations, and I think for a while he thought I was just kind of crazy, but then was able to show him that I was serious, and so we bought the house.
Great.
Yeah, which was pretty amazing and fantastic.
Yeah.
And then found a group of folks who are willing to live in there with the intention that I don't actually want to own this, but anybody who wants to possibly buy it. So we had all these buy-in possibilities in the beginning, and I mean, the nature of community is that you have a lot of different people with a lot of different needs, and it's always going to be an interesting, beautiful, tumultuous, who knows what. So there was a lot of reconfiguring, but it was also really exciting because at one point we had a fence down the middle of the yard, so we were able to take that down, open it up, start doing the gardens, and start to have this relationship between these 2 houses. And then at that point realized, like, well, there's another example here called Sabin Green. And it's a co-housing community, and it's 4 houses on 2 lots, so it's a much smaller space than this, but they developed it so that there's 4 houses around a commons, and that place really inspired the thought of maybe we should build another house, and how can we make all of these buildings relate to each other so that there's a social architecture that's kind of built into the space to encourage people to have interactions and relationships. So by having our French doors all face each other, and that we all look out on the shared space, and we all look out on what's considered the commons here.
Which is your gardens and your trees and so on, the yarding in between. Right.
Exactly. So the blessing of that is that, we are all, we all look at it at least once a day and see it. And that way we're encouraged to tend it, to talk to each other about it. I mean, the downside is that then it's also very public, and your life is pretty public too. So there's a balance between public and private here that I think calls to people who are really interested in that kind of living situation.
I also noticed that out front, you have your little wall of sunflowers. So in a sense, it both says we are different. You know?
Yes, it does.
But it also says, there's a little privacy. It both invites people to peek in and see the gardens and the trees, but it also says it's a kind of semi-fence. It's
Yeah.
both.
Yeah, so a living barrier.
So you looked at putting in another house, which I see that you've now done. So tell me about how that came about.
So then I was teaching a workshop in Mexico, and there were some folks there, and I was just talking out loud about the vision here, and I was like, all I need is $100,000, and we're going to build this other house, and I tend to get all these crazy ideas, and I have these amazing powers of manifestation, and things just happen. And so Matt Phillips, who was there, was like, well, I'm interested, and I thought he was kidding. And so we talked, and I realized he was serious, and then we decided that we should talk a little bit more and maybe flesh this out, because I never actually figured anybody would really do it. So then we started talking and coming up with designs, and at first my vision was that maybe the client wouldn't be involved, because I've done primarily homeowner built houses where I work with them, and there's pros and cons to that, and then he really wanted to be involved, and it seems like that's really part of the guiding philosophy, is that the more an owner is involved in the construction of a home, the more they have a sense of ownership. And it becomes less about investment and more about their personal commitment to their own space and creating, this own reflection of what they want in the world all around them.
Great.
And then it's less about the dollar signs and more about being in a place for however long, since we Americans tend to move with amazing frequency.
And I would imagine that if you're going to build it yourself or be part of the building process, you're going to probably be there longer, because you've put more of your heart, soul, and time and sweat into it.
Yeah. So there's definitely things when Sukita and I were talking about parting ways here, that I realized that the things that I had the most attachment to were certain living things, or trees that were planted, or the little house, or things like that were just so hard for me to think about leaving behind. And that's just a reflection of, once you feel like you have a reflection of yourself in the space around you, there's just a real different sense. And that's what I think is lacking from the American landscape.
And you are then really living in place. There is that living relationship between you and the rest of the beings that live in that space.
Yeah. And it's also just such an empowering thing, because most people are completely detached from shaping the world around them. We go into created environments, we're shuffled around, and that's another aspect of social architecture, is how it makes you feel as a human being. Are you connected to that space, or are you disconnected? So skyscrapers downtown, they're usually a very disempowering feeling to go into Bank of America and try to figure out your little way in there. But to create a space that someone feels like that's theirs, and that's a reflection of how they see the world.
So that house that you built with Matt Phillips is, I see that it fits in with the style of the other houses. You obviously did a lot of thinking and planning on this, but it's not built the same way the others are.
Yeah, so it's extra special in the fact that it looks like a craftsman style bungalow, but on the inside it's Portland's first permitted straw-bale structure.
First permitted straw-bale structure. What did it take to do that?
Well, it's the first permitted residential, so that's probably the best way to clarify it. We did an addition, and we've done a few other kind of preliminary test the waters prototypes before this project, and that was definitely one of my goals in Portland, is to get this on the urban map, because I feel like it's a really good way to build here. And the city at that point, there's already code for it, so really if you follow all their rules, then they have to basically permit it. They can say...
So they'd already been... That's fabulous.
Yeah. Great
you didn't
folks have laid the groundwork.
That's great.
That's
great. So we'll take a look at that, because I want to have people understand where the straw-bale-ness fits into the structure, because it looks like, regular house to the rest of us from the outside.
So that, kind of the goal and the joke that I use is that it's supposed to be like the gateway drug for natural building, just so that it looks normal, it's easy on the eyes. For most people who have this association with natural building as being whoa, hippied out, or has this one really particular aesthetic with it, that might turn a lot of people off for whatever reasons, whether it's philosophical or political backgrounds, or just to have something that they can approach in a way that feels just normal, it just fits in, and then the surprise is on the inside. Because really, there's a comment that people make almost every single time that they walk into a building that's made out of earthen materials, and that they comment on the way that it feels. It's a very different experience, and the first thing they do is they go touch the walls. And you don't find that in any other kind of construction. You rarely go into the drywall. This feels so good.
Right.
And whatever it is that elicits that response from people, we can take it in all sorts of different directions, but I've just seen it across the board. And there's something about that, just resonant feeling of walking into something that's basically handmade on on a really deep level.
And the materials right here from the earth, I mean, same that we're made out of. So there's some affinity, I'm sure, that people are feeling.
And there's an air quality and a quality of light, and there's definitely like an aesthetic that it lends itself to, which is a bit more. I mean, I've done very rectilinear, orthogonal straw-bale structures, but they still have that same kind of quality. But this one also has a lot of character just because a lot of people were involved, and it's not something that got planned out to the T at the very beginning. So.
What other kinds of special things would we see in there? Maybe what we should just do is see that. Is there more that we wanted to kind of cover in the basic picture here? I
think that's about it. I mean, there's definitely been a lot of reiterations, like of how we've laid out the space, trying to create how the commons, and it's in a constant state of recreation. So in some ways, it's regenerative all the time.
Well, and which is exactly what nature does.
Yeah,
is adapting to things as we go. I wanted to add that a question here is that. How are you able to put another house on a parcel?
So we found this little loophole in the way that you build, and there's two ways that we could have done it. And one is a much more straightforward and conventional way where we would subdivide the lot and then build a house. And we could build that house any way that we wanted it to look, but the permit fees are pretty expensive to build a house in Portland. And the other way is to build what's called an accessory dwelling unit. And it's a much stricter requirements in terms of aesthetic. So we had to match the aesthetic of the main house to a T. And you can only be a certain number of square foot. But we really wanted to model a small scale building because I could have filled that whole lot up with a house. But I didn't want to do that because the green space is far more valuable to me than bedroom space.
So what is the footprint here?
Well, right there, that house
of the accessory dwelling unit
is 800 square feet. So that's the maximum. So it's 2 floors, and we also have pretty thick straw bales. So it's pretty cozy, intimate space, and it's also a great challenge in how to just efficiently use small spaces. And so I really wanted to have a great demonstration project of small-scale urban living within the context of community and within the context of a lot of people being able to share that space. So, and modeling passive solar and reused materials and just trying to throw all the bells and whistles at it so that it could be something that people could look at and be like, oh, that's possible. Or I can take one facet of that and apply it to my own home or my own lifestyle. So,
good. Anything else that or maybe it'll show up as we converse.
Oh, and I guess just the other end is that after it's built, then we subdivide the property.
I see. Okay.
So we did a little backwards.
But a straightforward way.
Yeah.
Well, why don't you show us the bells and whistles?
Okay.
I'd like to see how a straw bale that looks just ordinary on the outside isn't on the inside.
Yes.
Okay, kitten. Shall we?
Shiny, you want to go?